The first time I realized being an Omega in this place wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. I was already halfway through a humiliating drill, tripping over my own boots while the entire Alpha squad sneered. "Nice job, future casualty," someone muttered, and I wanted to disappear into the dirt. No one knew my secret. Not the instructors, not the upperclassmen, not even the guys I trained beside day after day. To survive, I had to pretend to be Alpha. Aggressive, untouchable, a little cruel myself if needed. Every flex of my jaw, every confident stride across the parade grounds, it was all a carefully built facade. But underneath, I was fragile, anxious, longing, and if I dared to admit it, lonely. The academy itself was unforgiving. Located in a remote part of the Midwest, the buildings were gray and imposing, the grounds meticulously trimmed, and the walls echoed the sharp commands of instructors who demanded perfection at all times. Drill mornings began before sunrise, and by nightfall, bodies ached, tempers frayed, and the Omega in me threatened to surface in my trembling hands or soft sighs. I had to be Alpha, always Alpha. And then came him, Captain Jonathan Hayes. Broad-shouldered, icy gaze, and a reputation that made even the toughest cadets flinch. No one dared cross him, not even the Alpha elites who thought they ruled the school. He was precise, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. There was a rumor he had never punished an Omega publicly, yet somehow everyone feared him equally. Maybe it was because he always seemed to see straight through your defenses. Maybe it was because he did. The first encounter was accidental. Or maybe fate. I was on the rifle range, fumbling with my weapon, sweat slipping down my back. My hands shook, my Omega instincts threatening to betray me. And there he was, standing behind me, imposing, silent, his piercing blue eyes assessing everything. "Relax," he said finally, voice smooth, calm, but with an edge that could cut through steel. "You're too tense. You'll ruin your shot." I blinked. My cover almost cracked. Nobody ever spoke to me like that, like they could see the trembling Omega beneath the Alpha facade. But I clenched my jaw, straightened my shoulders, and nodded. Alpha. Always Alpha. Days turned into weeks. I kept my distance, pretending nothing had happened, keeping my secret locked behind layers of carefully crafted arrogance. But the way he moved in the academy, the way he watched men, judgmental, not cruel, but different, it made my heart pound and my chest ache in ways I couldn't explain. He never spoke of feelings. He never smiled in the way normal humans did. But there were moments, small and fleeting. A hand that lingered slightly longer when handing me a rifle, an unexpected glance when the hall was empty, a quiet word of encouragement when I thought no one noticed. And with each small gesture, my Omega instincts strained harder against the cage of my Alpha disguise. One night, during a mandatory night patrol, the air was thick with fog and tension. We were paired for the task, him and me, and the quiet between us was almost unbearable. Every step I took, I felt his presence pressing against me, the subtle warmth of his proximity making my chest tighten. "You're quiet tonight," he said finally, breaking the silence, his voice soft but commanding. "Does something bother you?" I swallowed hard. My mind raced. I couldn't reveal my secret. Not yet. Not here. So I kept my tone flat, Alpha-like. "Just tired," I said, my voice betraying nothing. His gaze held mine longer than necessary, and I felt exposed, fragile. I hated it, yet I couldn't look away. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen if he found out. If the walls I built so carefully crumbled in his presence. Weeks passed, and the tension grew unbearable. There was a drill, a rigorous, humiliating exercise designed to test limits and expose weaknesses. I was pushed beyond exhaustion, my legs shaking, my uniform soaked with sweat, and he appeared, as always, calm, unyielding, watching every move with that unnerving, cold attention that made my heart stutter. "You're struggling," he stated, not a question, a fact. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, my Omega instincts flared against my Alpha mask. I wanted to run, hide, or collapse any of them. Instead, I bit my lip, forcing my expression into the practiced mask of indifference. "Not struggling," I said, voice even, heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. He stepped closer. The world narrowed to him, to the taut tension between us, to the quiet understanding that I was hiding something he could already feel. There was no accusation, no malice, just a dangerous, intimate knowledge. And my breath hitched, because for the first time I didn't want to hide. That night, alone in the barracks, I replayed every moment, every glance, every word. I felt exposed in ways I hadn't in years. My Omega self, fragile, tender, desperate for care, strained against the Alpha facade. And I knew somehow Captain Hayes could see right through me. By the end of the month, the unspoken tension had become unbearable. Every command, every correction, every passing glance felt like a test of endurance. And yet, hidden beneath the rigorous structure of the academy, a fragile, dangerous intimacy was forming. I couldn't admit it, not to myself, not to him, but it was there, simmering quietly, ready to ignite. And then the impossible happened. During a late-night inspection, when the halls were quiet and the moonlight spilled over the marble floors, he cornered me. Calm, composed, but with an intensity that made my knees weak. I know, he said, voice barely above a whisper, yet it struck me like thunder. I know who you are. I froze. My secret, the one thing I had guarded with every ounce of strength, was laid bare by the coldest, most untouchable person in the academy. And instead of punishment, instead of mockery, his hand reached for mine, not roughly, not with cruelty, but gently, possessively. My heart stuttered, my breath caught, and in that moment, the first thread of trust, of something tender, began to weave between us. The first chapter of a dangerous, intimate, and unspoken connection had begun. A connection that would challenge every rule, every fear, every expectation in the rigid world we inhabited, and eventually lead to consequences neither of us could have foreseen. The morning after that confession or revelation, however you wanted to call it, felt different. The academy grounds seemed colder, sharper, almost like they were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. I couldn't look at anyone without the secret humming under my skin, but most of all, I couldn't avoid him. Captain Hayes moved through the corridors with that same unreadable expression, but every now and then, his gaze found me. And when it did, it felt like the world had shrunk to the space between us. Drills were harder than ever. I pushed myself beyond exhaustion, trying to keep the Alpha mask intact, trying to keep him from seeing the Omega beneath. But it was impossible. Every flinch, every quickened breath, every twitch of hesitation betrayed me. And he noticed. Always. We were assigned to a joint exorcisia night operation simulation that demanded absolute coordination. It was the perfect trap for me, or maybe a perfect test for both of us. I walked beside him through the darkened woods that bordered the academy. The only sounds are careful footsteps and the occasional snapping twig. My nerves were frayed, my Omega instincts screaming at me to flee, to curl into myself, to hide in the shadows. Relax, he said, voice low and steady, closer than necessary. His proximity made my chest ache. You can't afford mistakes tonight. I nodded, keeping my face impassive. But inside, my mind was a storm of fear and desire, longing and anxiety. I didn't just want to survive this drill, I wanted to feel something real with him, even if it meant risking everything. As we navigated through the obstacles, I noticed the subtle ways he protected me. A hand brushing my back, directing me silently when I faltered, positioning himself between me and potential danger. Each touch was fleeting, yet it left sparks along my nerves. My mask wavered, my Omega instincts surging in waves of need and fear. By the end of the exercise, we were soaked, exhausted, our uniforms smeared with mud. And yet, when he looked at me, there was a strange softness in his gaze. You did well, he said. No praise, no condescension, just a quiet acknowledgement. But it made my chest ache and my knees weak. Weeks passed. The tension between us became unbearable. I caught myself noticing him in ways that went beyond mere survival. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the way his jaw clenched when he was focused, the subtle heat of his hand against mine when our fingers brushed accidentally. Each moment left me dizzy, longing, and terrified. One night, during a mandatory solitary patrol, I found myself alone with him in the academy's training yard. The moonlight cast long shadows over the meticulously trimmed grass, and for the first time, the rigid discipline of the academy seemed irrelevant. He approached silently, his uniform crisp, his eyes sharp, yet not threatening. "I shouldn't be doing this," he whispered, though he was only a few feet away. "You're not supposed to feel this." Yet, I swallowed hard, unable to speak. My Omega instincts flared, my body betraying the calm alpha mask I wore so carefully. And in that moment, I realized how deep my feelings had become, how much I craved his attention, his touch, his acknowledgement. He stepped closer, and the world narrowed to him, to the sharp line of his jaw, to the dangerous curve of his gaze. "Do you trust me?" he asked softly. I nodded, though my heart raced like a drum in my chest. My instincts told me to flee, to hide, to resist, but something in his presence demanded obedience, demanded submission in a way that terrified and thrilled me simultaneously. And then he touched me, just a hand on my shoulder, firm yet gentle, and it sent a shockwave through my body. I gasped softly, my Omega instincts flaring, my mask cracking just enough to show the vulnerability I'd hidden for so long. "You're mine," he said quietly, the words almost lost in the night air, but they wrapped around me, binding me in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I didn't argue. I didn't even try. I simply let him hold me, let the warmth of his presence fill the hollow spaces I hadn't admitted existed even to myself. The following days were a blur. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared moment became a battlefield of emotions. I wanted to scream, to confess, to collapse under the weight of desire and fear. Yet I kept the alpha mask in place, because even in this fragile intimacy, the world demanded discipline, demanded strength. He began to leave subtle marks, traces of ownership that only I would notice. A hand lingering on my waist when passing me a rifle, a brush of fingers along my shoulder, a whispered word in my ear that sent shivers down my spine. Each mark was a reminder that he knew, that he saw, that he claimed me without the world ever understanding. And then the incident happened. A routine inspection turned catastrophic. One of the cadets, jealous of my perceived favor with the captain, tried to humiliate me publicly, exposing my Omega traits to the squad. My heart raced, panic clawing at my chest. I braced for ridicule, for punishment, for disaster. But he intervened. Captain Hayes stepped forward, calm, authoritative, and terrifyingly commanding. "Back off," he said, his voice a blade cutting through the murmurs. The cadets froze, fear and respect mingling in their eyes. And in that moment the world shifted. I was no longer just an Omega hiding under a facade. I was someone he protected, someone he claimed, someone he valued beyond the rigid rules of the academy. Afterwards, in the quiet of his office, he confronted me. "You can't hide forever," he said, his gaze piercing through the alpha mask I clung to. "I see you, all of you, and it's not something I can ignore." My chest ached, my hands trembled, and I realized how much I had longed for this acknowledgement, how desperate I was for him to see the Omega I had hidden for so long. I nodded, unable to speak, letting the vulnerability I had fought to conceal spill over in silent surrender. From that night on, the dynamic shifted. We moved closer in small ways, shared moments in the mess hall, fleeting touches during drills, quiet words exchanged in the barracks. Every interaction was charged, electric, and intimate, a dangerous dance that neither of us could fully control. Yet, even as our connection deepened, the world of the academy remained unforgiving. Rules demanded discipline, appearances demanded alpha perfection, and any slip could expose us both. But the tension, the longing, the unspoken affectionate became a lifeline. A fragile, secret world in which we could exist, even if only for moments stolen between the rigid structure of military life. And then, in the middle of one particularly grueling exercise, it happened. My body betrayed me, My Omega instincts surged in full force, leaving me vulnerable, exposed, trembling in ways I couldn't control. Panic surged through me, my alpha facade crumbling under the intensity of desire and need. He was there immediately, hands firm but gentle, holding me steady, eyes filled with something I hadn't dared to imagine: care, possessiveness, warmth. "It's okay," he whispered, voice low and steady. "I've got you." And in that instant, I realized I was no longer hiding. I was seen, fully, completely, in ways I had never allowed anyone to see before. The fragile, trembling Omega, the desperate, lonely hearted, all belonged to him, and somehow, dangerously, beautifully, he belonged to me. The academy was quiet that night, the dormitories wrapped in silence as if holding their breath. But in my room, I couldn't find peace. My mind replayed every moment of the past weeks, the fleeting touches, the subtle glances, the nights spent on edge, feeling his presence like a weight both terrifying and comforting. I had never imagined that someone could see me so completely and still remain near. A knock at the door startled me. My heart skipped a beat. No one ever came to my room unannounced. I hesitated, then opened it, only to find him, Captain Hayes, standing there, coat collar turned up against the chill, his eyes unreadable yet intense. "We need to talk," he said, voice low, carrying that weight that made my knees weak. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The room felt smaller, hotter somehow, the space between us charged with unspoken tension. He closed the door silently behind him, and I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but anticipation. "I can't ignore this anymore," he began, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're my Omega. You've always been mine, whether you realized it or not." I swallowed hard. My Omega instincts flared at the words, a rush of heat and longing that left me dizzy. I wanted to protest, to push back, to insist that I was alpha enough to handle myself, but I couldn't. Not when he looked at me that way. Not when the walls I had built around my heart were crumbling under the force of his presence. He stepped closer, bridging the space between us, and the world outside my dorm room ceased to exist. "I've been patient," he said, voice almost a growl now. "But patience only goes so far." And then he kissed me, not the tentative, cautious kind, but the kind that claimed me, shook me and left me gasping. My hands went to his shoulders, clutching at the fabric of his uniform as if holding on to him could anchor me to reality. His hands were everywhere, in my back, my waist, holding me close yet controlling, guiding. The kiss was a mix of fire and ice, danger and safety, alpha and omega intertwining in a way that left me shivering and aching all at once. When we finally broke apart, I could barely breathe. My chest heaved, my mind scrambled, and yet I felt a clarity I had never known. He studied me, his gaze intense, possessive, tender. "You're mine," he whispered again, and this time, it wasn't just desire, it was a promise. The following weeks were a whirlwind. We moved carefully, hiding our growing intimacy from the rest of the academy. Every touch, every whispered word, every lingering glance was a rebellion against the rigid rules, a declaration of something too powerful to contain. I felt alive in ways I had never imagined, my Omega self thriving under his attention and care, even as my alpha facade remained intact for the world. Then came the moment I never expected. It was during a winter exercise, deep in the forests surrounding the academy. Snow had begun to fall, blanketing the grounds in white, muffling sound and light. We were assigned a survival simulation, and I found myself paired with him. The cold was biting, my hands numbed despite gloves, and every step through the snow was an effort. We set up a small camp, huddling for warmth. I tried to maintain composure, but my body betrayed me, shivering violently. He noticed instantly, pulling me close, his coat around us both. The heat from his body was intoxicating, a lifeline in the freezing darkness. "You're not just hiding your Omega," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. "You're hiding everything that makes you, you. And I won't let you do that anymore." I felt tears prick my eyes, overwhelmed by the intensity of his words and the honesty in his touch. I wanted to speak, to explain, to confess, but words failed me. My body responded instead, leaning into his warmth, needing him more than I had ever needed anyone. And then it happened, an instinctive, unavoidable truth. My omega cycle surged unexpectedly, leaving me vulnerable, shaking, and desperate. Panic gripped me. I hadn't anticipated this, not here, not in the cold, not with the world watching. He held me firmly, his hands steady, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's okay," he said. "I've got you. Always." In that moment, every fear, every secret, every longing came to the surface. I couldn't hide from him, not now, not ever. And I didn't want to. My body, my heart, my soul, everything was his. He guided me through it, gentle yet commanding, patient yet unyielding. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only us, the snow, the cold, the quiet, and the overwhelming intimacy of surrendering fully to him. I realized then how much I had needed this, how much I had needed him. When it was over, he held me close, his forehead resting against mine. "You're safe with me," he whispered. "Always." It was then that I realized the truth of our connection, not just desire, not just possession, but something deeper. He didn't just want me. He wanted to protect me, to nurture me, to claim the parts of me that the world had taught me to hide. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. We learned each other's limits, each other's needs, each other's secrets. And amidst the discipline, the drills, the relentless demands of the academy, a fragile, precious intimacy grew. Then, months later, it happened, the moment that would change everything. I awoke one morning to find a small bundle placed carefully on my cot. My heart raced before I even recognized it. Inside was a tiny infant, swaddled in blankets, eyes closed, breathing softly. Confusion and shock collided within me. He stepped forward, calm as ever, though his gaze was softer than I had ever seen. "Meet what we've created," he said quietly. "Our bond, our omega, a part of both of us." I stared at the tiny life in my arms, tears streaming down my face. The reality of what he had entrusted to me, the intimacy, the vulnerability, the trust, it was overwhelming. This was more than desire, more than connection, it was family. It was love. It was the culmination of everything we had risked, everything we had hidden, everything we had longed for. He watched me, waiting, and I realized that in that moment, the strict rules of the academy, the rigid expectations, the masks we had worn, they no longer mattered. All that mattered was this fragile life, this unspoken promise, this love that had survived fear, secrecy, and pain. "I'll help," I whispered, voice trembling. I'll protect it. Both of us." He nodded, a rare smile touching his lips, and in that smile, I saw the man behind the captain, the man who had always seen me, truly seen me. "I know you will," he said. "We'll face this together." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The future was uncertain, yes, and the academy would never understand. But in that moment, holding the tiny life that represented our bond, I felt hope, joy, and an intimacy deeper than I had ever imagined. The snow outside glimmered in the morning light, the academy silent but somehow softer, warmer. And within our small, secret world, I realized something profound. Love could exist even in the harshest, most unforgiving places, and it could create life, hope, and happiness even where none seemed possible. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead, and whispered, "You're mine, we're ours." And in that moment, I knew he was right. We had survived the fear, the secrecy, the danger, and now we had each other, fully, completely, and a new life to protect and nurture together. The weeks following the arrival of the tiny life were a whirlwind of adjustment, fear, and awe. Every morning, I woke with a mixture of dread and exhilaration, knowing that the fragile bundle in my arms depended on me, on us. It was both terrifying and grounding, a responsibility that I had never anticipated yet somehow embraced instinctively. Captain Hayes was relentless in his devotion. Every glance, every touch, every word carried the weight of protection and care. But beneath the strict discipline, there was softness of patience and tenderness that I had only glimpsed in stolen moments before. Now it was constant, undeniable, and it filled the spaces of my life that I hadn't realized were empty. We adapted to a new rhythm. The academy continued its harsh routines, drills, and exercises, but within our small world, there was a sanctuary. Nights were spent huddled together in the dormitory, the tiny life nestled between us, our breaths synchronizing in quiet intimacy. I found myself learning new ways to care, to nurture, to anticipate needs not just for the child, but for him, for us. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the snowy grounds, I found myself sitting on the steps outside the barracks. The infant slept in a sling against my chest, warm and soft, and Captain Hayes joined me silently. He sat close enough that our shoulders brushed, close enough that I could feel the heat of him seeping into my own frozen limbs. "You've changed," he said softly, his gaze on the child. "You're more than I ever imagined." I laughed quietly, a sound of disbelief and joy. I never imagined this life, or this, us. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from my face, his fingers lingering against my skin. "We've created something extraordinary," he murmured. "Something worth protecting at all costs." The intimacy between us deepened in ways that words could never fully capture. Every touch, every glance, every shared responsibility for our small, fragile life became a declaration of love. We no longer needed words to define what we were. Our actions, our care, and our presence spoke volumes. At the academy, rumors began to circulate, subtle whispers among the cadets, curious glances, but no one dared confront the captain directly. He maintained his authority with the same cold precision as always, yet there was a subtle shift in how he treated me, how he moved through the halls when we were together. A gentle protection, almost imperceptible to others, but clear to me. There were moments of danger, of course. Drills could be brutal, instructors unforgiving, and maintaining appearances required constant vigilance. But those challenges became opportunities for us to strengthen our bond. Every obstacle, every trial, was a reminder of how much we had endured to reach this fragile equilibrium. One particularly bitter winter day, a training exercise went awry. A sudden snowstorm trapped a squad of cadets, and I found myself alongside Captain Hayes, navigating through waist-deep snow to ensure their safety. The wind bit through my uniform, my hands numbed despite gloves, but I focused on the task at hand, relying on the instincts he had taught me. When we finally returned, soaked and exhausted, he looked at me with that same intensity that had haunted me for months. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his hand gripping mine firmly. "And you're not alone. Never alone." I felt tears prick my eyes, the depth of his words sinking into me. I had spent so long hiding, so long pretending, so long fearing exposure. And yet, here he was, Captain Hayes, formidable, commanding, unyielding, standing beside me, unwavering, devoted, and unconditionally present. Our life together became a delicate balance of discipline and tenderness. The infant thrived under our care, his small hands curling around our fingers, his soft coos filling the otherwise rigid halls with warmth. Nights were filled with whispered reassurances, quiet laughter, and the subtle, unspoken intimacy that bound us irrevocably. I began to notice the changes in myself. The Omega I had hidden so fiercely began to emerge naturally, without fear or shame. My alpha facade remained for the academy, but within our private moments, I allowed myself to be fully seen, fully known, fully loved. Captain Hayes, too, revealed layers of himself I had never imagined. The cold, imposing figure was balanced by vulnerability, tenderness, and an almost reverent reverence for the life we had created together. Our love was no longer a secret burden but a guiding force, shaping our actions, our choices, our very existence. One evening, as spring approached and the snow melted into muddy grounds, we found ourselves walking through the academy's gardens, the infant nestled in my arms. The world felt impossibly vast, yet contained within our small family was a sense of completeness I had never known. "You've changed everything," he said quietly, his eyes on the child. I never imagined. I never allowed myself to hope for this. I smiled, leaning into him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. I never imagined either, but I don't regret a single moment. Not the fear, not the secrecy, not the danger. Every step brought me here to Thysis. He pressed a kiss to my temple, gentle and grounding. Us, he echoed, and in that simple word, I felt the culmination of months of tension, longing, and hidden desire. It was a declaration, a promise, and a triumph. Our days settled into a rhythm of shared responsibilities, mutual care, and quiet moments of intimacy. Every glance, every touch, every small act of love was a reinforcement of the bond we had fought to protect. And as the child grew, thriving and healthy, we found a new sense of purpose, one that transcended the harsh rules of the academy and the rigid expectations of the world outside. The academy eventually noticed the change, though not fully understanding it. Captain Hayes maintained discipline, authority, and control, yet there was a softness, a patience, a subtle acknowledgement of our private life that no one could question. I moved with a newfound confidence, comfortable in the duality of my alpha persona and my omega identity, secure in the knowledge that I was seen, protected, and loved. One particularly warm evening, we sat together on the steps of the barracks, the child asleep between us, the world bathed in the golden light of sunset. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the warmth of his body, the quiet intimacy that spoke louder than words. I never knew it could be like this, I murmured. Peaceful, safe, full of love. He tightened his arm around me, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. We've earned it, he said softly, through every challenge, every fear, every risk. And now we have this life, this love. The seasons changed, and with them, we grew stronger not just as individuals, but as a family. The academy remained a place of discipline, rigor, and expectation. Yet within its walls, we had carved out a sanctuary. Our bond, once fragile and precarious, had become unbreakable. There were still moments of fear, still challenges to face, still whispers of judgment. But together, we faced them with a strength born of love, trust, and shared vulnerability. Every trial, every hardship, only reinforced the truth we had discovered. That love, even in the harshest and most unforgiving places, could thrive, could nurture, and could create life. And as I watched Captain Hayes hold the infant, his eyes soft, his posture relaxed, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For him, for the child, for the journey we had endured together. Every fear, every secret, every longing had led us here to a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. I leaned into him, feeling the steady warmth of his body, the protective strength that had become my anchor. Thank you, I whispered, for seeing me, for protecting me, for everything. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit his features in a way I had never seen before. Thank you, he replied softly, for trusting me, for being brave enough to let me in. And in that moment, with the child nestled safely between us, the world outside the academy forgotten, I realized something profound. We had survived the harshest trials, endured the fiercest storms, and navigated the most treacherous secrets. And through it all, we had found each other, fully, completely, irrevocably. The future was uncertain, as all futures are. But in the warmth of this small, precious family, I knew one truth above all others, that love, trust, and devotion could create miracles, even in the most unlikely of places. And as the sun set over the academy grounds, painting the world in hues of gold and hope, I understood that we had not just survived, we had thrived. We were a family, we were strong, and we were finally undeniably happy. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.